All right, so let us get started. Okay, well, we want to thank you guys for inviting us and letting us talk to you about our WIFIA program and all the cool things that are happening this year. I think what we had discovered was that we needed to, talk to the right folks to just make sure that the information was getting out there about our program. We're a relatively new program. We were established in 2014, but I think it wasn't until 2018 before we actually issued our first loans. And then 4 years later, now we have a portfolio about 100 loans, and it's continuing to grow. So prime time to be talking to you guys and seeing if you have any questions about the program. We want to share some tidbits with you in terms of the program and how it could benefit some of the clientele that you might have, or some of the utilities out there who are kind of seeking funding. All right, so if you're not familiar with WIFIA at all, WIFIA stands for Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. We are a supplemental financing option, and what that means is our program was established to kind of help accelerate investment. We can fund up to 49% of eligible project costs for a project. This slide just kind of provides an overview of some of our program features. They will kind of be discussed as we move along in the presentation, but this just provides the highlights of our program. Our program was established with some statutory requirements. We are able to lend to projects that have a project size minimum of $20 million for large communities, and $5 million if you're a smaller community. So statutorily, that's defined as less than 25,000. And that's in terms of population served. As I mentioned, we're a supplemental financing option. So 49% of eligible project costs can be financed through our program. We have a lot of financial flexibilities, one of which being a very long loan maturity date, 35 years from substantial completion. So what that ends up looking like is about a 40 plus a loan term if you exercise the full length of the 35 years. There's also a 5-year maximum time that you can defer a payment, and Martin will talk a little bit more about that in the financial piece of the presentation today. Our interest rate is set on based on the Treasury rate, slugs rate. Martin again will talk about how that's kind of set and what that looks like. But it is locked at loan closing, so that it doesn't fluctuate based on disbursements or anything. It's locked at loan closing. And of course, as you look at our program, we are a federal program. We have a broad eligibility that allows for a variety of borrowers, a variety of different projects: wastewater, stormwater, drinking water, water reuse, green infrastructure. Quite a bit of projects come through our way. And because we are a federal funding program, there are also federal requirements that we have to be aware of, one being NEPA. Davis-Bacon is a big one. American Iron and Steel, Build America, Buy America, and all other federal cross-cutter provisions do apply for our program. If you see here, this is just kind of a sneak peek into our WIFIA pipeline and portfolio. You can kind of see, I think, some of the common misconceptions that we've seen spoken about our program. It's just in terms of the types of projects that we can fund. But as you can see here, there's quite a variety of projects falling into those 5 different categories that we fund. There is also this misconception that we are a program for large borrowers. But as you can see here, just the loan amounts that the WIFIA program can fund, we're only limited by the project size minimum. There's no cap to our program, so it can be a very large project, but we have small projects too. And I think on average, our loan size is about $110 million. So that kind of falls in the, closer to the medium large range. Population served, as you can see here, we're kind of a majority of our loans are to communities that serve about, the medium-sized range in communities, the 100,000 to 500,000 population. And of course, you can see here with our geographic scope, we do span across the U.S. We don't discriminate, but as you can see here, the West is of a great need. So we do have a lot of projects in the West. As Shelby mentioned, we do have some new things with our loan process. So this is just a kind of overview of our how the WIFIA loan process works. We do have 2 stages to our application process. The first stage being the project selection phase. If you're familiar with the WIFIA program in the past, we have been a competitive-based selection of projects where we then, invite you to apply for a WIFIA loan after certain criteria are met and after they've been ranked against other potential applicants. This year, we've kind of moved away from that. We've moved to a rolling application basis. What that means is we've kind of opened up funding year-round. We've made that flexibility so that it can fit with what your financial funding needs look like at any given point in the year. And, based on how your projects kind of line up in terms of when you're ready to actually receive funding. Our rolling process, our rolling process does still have a start date in a sense each year. Because as a program, we are funded through congressional appropriations, and that kind of initiates this notice of funding availability that we issue each year to kind of tell you how much money we have available. But in terms of when the letters of interest are due, that's a rolling process. Our start date for receiving those is September 6th, but it continues throughout the year until our funding for that fiscal year has depleted. And then we'll start again for the next year based on the funding available in the next fiscal year through congressional appropriations. There is going to be a letter of an interest evaluation phase and a project selection step as well. But in the past, it's typically been a 6-month process, and we've kind of tried to streamline it. So now that it, from the time of submittal of your LOI, it should be about a 2-month process before you hear back from us in terms of moving forward to this second stage, which is the project review, negotiation, and closing stage. And this is where the meat of the work is, where we get some additional details about your project, we get a little bit more information about your financial needs, how you want to structure the loan, how you want to structure the repayment of the loan. And then we kind of do a deeper dive into what your needs are for a loan. The application submission, we do give up to a year to provide the application materials. But once that process starts going, it's about typically a 4 to 7 month process for a fairly standard loan application. So I think you guys are quite aware of the amount of federal funding that's been made available this past year. It's a once in a generation type funding opportunity for water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure. And so I just kind of wanted to have this slide to kind of give you a quick rundown of what's out there and how WIFIA kind of fits into that funding landscape. So back in 2021, not too long ago, IIJA was passed, billions and billions of dollars for water, wastewater infrastructure. The American Rescue Plan was implemented to kind of help provide some of that supplemental funding to move these projects along. And WIFIA, I think all of those funds are considered federal funds. If you're familiar with the SRF program, they got a whole lot of money through the IIJA, or you might hear it as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill. They got a whole lot of funding there too. Excuse me. So the SRFs are partially federal. They do have some federal aspects to them. So there are some federal requirements attached to the money that is the federal portion. But mostly the SRF is non-federal. These are the types of loans that, these are the types of funding sources that we've kind of seen come through. There are definitely other funding sources as well. WIFIA loans, because we are supplemental financing, we do see multiple sources of loans being used, or multiple sources of funds being used for the project. And we find ways to kind of work around, that as we work through your application process. I often say we're a supplemental financing option, but I like to think of us as a flexible financing option. Because we do have a lot of flexibilities in how we structure the loan, how we identify projects, how we can bundle projects. We try to find ways to help you fill the gaps in your project funding. So maybe that's a question for you guys as you're kind of thinking through the projects you have, how they line up with each other, how you want to bundle projects. WIFIA can be considered one of those flexible options you can kind of use to fill the gaps of for your project. And then I'm going to move this on to Forrest, who's going to talk a little bit more about how flexible we are, how broad of a program we are in terms of the eligible categories that we have. Forrest?
Thank you, Tom. Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our eligibilities, who's eligible, what type of projects are eligible, and what type of costs are eligible. So starting off with who's eligible is pretty broad. We can pretty much provide assistance to all public and private kind of type entities, by and large, both local, state, tribal, federal governments, partnerships, joint ventures, JPAs, corporations and trusts, and clean water and drinking water SRF programs. The only people we can't really give money to is individuals. One caveat there for the private side, they do have to receive evidence of public sponsorship and support from their local kind of municipalities or other agencies. So let's go then on to what kind of projects are eligible. So if you're familiar with the SRF programs, drinking water, clean water, we can fund anything under those eligibilities as well. The only additional kind of caveat there is also those kind of private entities. But in broad terms, we can pretty much fund almost anything that's under the kind of water, wastewater, infrastructure type projects, and stormwater as well. But building on those large SRF eligibilities, there's some additional WIFIA specific eligibilities as well that target some resilience, desalinization, aquifer recharge, some water reuse, recycling, drought prevention, and the like, including acquisition of property if it's integral to project that will mitigate environmental impacts of the project or is needed to build and construct the project. And then a combination of projects secured by one common security pledge or submitted under one application. And so one thing there is that we can take both some of your maybe drinking water and wastewater CIP and put them together into one project as long as there's that common finance. So we're going to elaborate that a little more on that on the next slide. And so as long as there's that kind of common purpose, so say some water and sewer CIP, and that has that common security pledge, we can fund a wide amount of sub-projects. And so that's something that some borrowers might not be aware of. They might have one particular project in mind. But when we think of the WIFIA project, that can have many different sub-projects underneath it. And we generally cap this to kind of about a 5-year period. So from loan closing or beginning of construction to when you reach that substantial completion, you can have a number of different smaller projects in there that might be a little separate, but as they have that common purpose of, say, sewer or water or both, you can add them together to kind of get that full WIFIA project there. Again, that still has that $20 million cap or minimum, sorry, and then $5 million minimum, $5 million for small communities. Let's go on to eligible project costs. So again, thinking outside the box here is beyond just construction activities, WIFIA is eligible and able to fund a lot of costs needed to get these projects off the ground. That includes development phase activities, certainly construction, reconstruction, placement activities, again, acquisition of real properties as needed, capitalized interest, any type of application credit processing fees, and then previously incurred costs are eligible as well, as long as they've meeting all of our federal requirements sometimes. So we're gonna go a little bit more into what some of those federal requirements are. So my colleague Ashley is gonna take us on with some of the environmental requirements.
Thanks, Forrest. Yeah, it's as Forrest mentioned, as a part of kind of being a federal loan program and having that federal nexus, there are quite a few, federal requirements that the projects have to be in compliance with. And one of the big pieces of that is related to these environmental cross-cutting authorities. I think the big one is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. All of our loans, before we can close, have to reach a final NEPA determination. And the action that we're looking at is, to provide credit assistance or not through the WIFIA loan. Along with the NEPA determination, we'll talk about this on the next slide. There are a list of other environmental cross-cutting authorities that will document compliance with. And, as we're moving through this environmental review piece, we can see a lot of projects in different stages, a lot of projects that maybe have other federal funding or funding with the state revolving fund, or maybe there's another federal agency involved, such as the Army Corps or Bureau of Reclamation. And, something that we're able to do is work in tandem with these agencies. If the projects that we're looking at under the WIFIA loan, fall into another action from another federal agency, we can use similar consultations that they've done or similar documentation. And, our review can kind of come, before, after, during, the process for environmental review for other agencies as well. So I think that's, something we want to note, especially for projects if they have a lot of other agencies involved. It's helpful for us, it's helpful for the other agency, and we think it's less burdensome, on the borrower if we can kind of all get involved, use the same documentation, things like that. Just, an important piece to note is, our federal action may be different than another agency. So we'll all probably have our own, NEPA determination. The consultations may be a little different, but there is a big, room to kind of work across agencies through the environmental piece to maybe be as, collaborative and less burdensome for everyone. Go ahead to the next slide, Tom. And I put up just some of the other environmental cross-cutting authorities that we're going to look at. NEPA being the big one, we'll need that NEPA determination, but we're also going to document compliance with Clean Water Act. Maybe there's a 404 permit that's needed. That's some of the coordination we could have with the Army Corps. We've seen Coastal Zone Management Act, so projects happening in the, on the coastal zones along the coasts. Endangered Species Act, so that's looking at, potential impacts from the project to threatened or endangered species. And National Historic Preservation Act, that one's thinking about potential impacts to, historic resources, historic properties. Those are, I think, the big ones, but it is a little bit of a long list that we're looking at, and all of our projects will look at and document compliance or applicability with some of these authorities. And I think I have one note on there that is important for us is it's important to remember these federal requirements, especially Davis-Bacon, American Iron and Steel, and a lot of these environmental cross-cutting authorities for projects that are already in construction. I think our experience shows that getting through some of these consultations like Endangered Species Act or National Historic Preservation Act is easier if we've started consultation, as soon as we know, there's construction or early on in the project. So if you're coming to us with projects in construction, that's something we want to know as soon as possible so we can, try to make sure that we can get through consultation as smoothly as possible. And, again, we'll ask lots of questions during the application and, work with other agencies and, get through kind of this environmental review piece. But, just to reiterate, all of our loans will have a NEPA determination, and then all of them will, have some sort of documentation of, compliance or applicability with, this isn't an exhaustive list, but, a lot of these environmental cross-cutting authorities. I think the next slide, I am passing it.
I'm
back
taking
to
it
Forrest.
back. Thank you, Ashley. And so that was a great summary of the environmental requirements. But in addition to some of the environmental requirements, part of the federal funding is some additional ones as well. So as mentioned before, was Davis-Bacon wage rates, federal wage rates, and up until now we've had the American Iron Steel domestic preference is, but most recently with the Build America, Buy America Act, BABA, we are now subject to some additional domestic preference requirements. So the WIFIA program is covered under BABA, and in short, BABA covers everything effective as of May 14th of this year, and includes iron and steel, manufactured goods, construction materials that are permanently incorporated into the project. And so in essence, for a lot of these projects, it's going to be almost everything that's permanently incorporated into the project has to comply with this federal requirement for domestic preference. And so because this is so new and it is a very large cross-agency effort, the EPA is still considering and being careful about how this is being implemented and in this transition period. So to cover this transition period, WIFIA has secured a waiver, a programmatic waiver for all potential projects that come in through WIFIA financing and to be exempt from the Build America, Buy America, BABA requirements, as long as they have initiated design and planning prior to that effective date of May 14th, 2022. So as long as that design and planning has been initiated and can be showed, that will be exempt. And so that'll hopefully buy us some time. In the coming years, we'll have better information on how to implement Build America, Buy America requirements for future borrowers as well. Moving on, we're going to dive into what is our kind of technical review looks like. And so one misconception we sometimes get is that we don't work well with collaborative delivery or different type of project delivery methods. And that is not true. We have many different types of projects that are design build, progressive design build, construction management at risk. So a lot of these larger projects can benefit from these different delivery. So we work with all of them, and our technical review process is pretty much the same for each one. And our technical review process is not design review and approval. We're relying on local and other authorities and agencies to provide that design review. Our review here is much more a risk-based approach for the technical, and what technical aspects are impacting the credit risks to the government and to the EPA. And so that's generally what we're looking at in how was this project developed, how were costs and schedule determined, are they reasonable, is there sufficient contingency or time built in given our current situations with supply chains, is there technological risks, coordinations, is there going to be extra time needed for environmental consultations, implementation, what's your current system condition look like? How is your current system being managed? And then as well as, are you able to implement all the federal requirements that are required? And so part of that is construction underway. Is that part under construction? Is that able to conform and meet those federal requirements? And so we're going to talk a little bit about considerations for the loan and project timelines, and then kind of things to consider when you come in. And so with our new rolling process, we're going from that competitive selection to the letter of interest being rolling, and we have an initial goal of getting that process down to about 2 months or 8 weeks or so. And so we're going to find out as we enter that, but it's in order to help shorten that time so that we can work better with different borrowers, that they come in when they're ready to come in. And so they're not coming in maybe too early or it's too late. And so we can kind of hit that sweet spot better. And so then after that, borrowers have up to about a year to come in for their application from being selected to coming in with their formal application. And then that application due diligence time till closing typically happens between 4 to 7 months. It all really depends on how ready the project is and how fast we can kind of negotiate through and communicative. And so that depends by each kind of individual borrower and relationship. But that's kind of a general rule. So as Ashley said, Don Tassa, we can kind of take any projects as long as they're wherever they are. They don't have to be in construction or at 100% design. They can be a whole range, especially if you're coming in for a large group of CIPs or a different combination of smaller projects. But some things to consider is there kind of tends to be a kind of sweet spot of when things move most quickly. And so things to consider is that we can fund those previously incurred construction eligible costs as long as they are less than that 51% and that they can meet all those federal requirements. Project design doesn't have to be that 100%, but around 30% design, so we have a good idea of what the scope is, what the costs are, and that's a good estimate of costs, and schedule tends to be good, but again, kind of wherever it is. And then lastly, in terms of planning and design only loans, they are now an option, but they must meet that minimum requirement of 20 million or 5 million for small communities less than the 25,000. So I'm going to turn it over to Martin to talk a little bit about some of our credit benefits.
Okay, thank you, Forrest. So I'll talk a little bit about the financial modeling that we do and the financial benefits to a borrower from using the WIFIA program. As was mentioned, we've closed transactions various. Some of our loan range has been between 14 million and 700 million. So the project would be where it's about 49% of the total project. The project would be about double that. But we have closed loans as small as 14 million. And of course, we've gone to the 700 million, where we've gone quite high as well. And we're looking at projects higher than that. That's whatever size of the project. There could be some benefits from the WIFIA program. The favorable rate bullet, I'd like to highlight that as Don Tom mentioned, this is a fixed rate program, we set the rate at the day of closing, regardless of when the draws will actually occur. And the rate that is set is 1 basis point over the weighted average life of the loan, of the WIFIA loan, starting from the first day of the draw until the last dollar is repaid. And which we add 1 basis point to that, not 1%, 1 basis point to that, the weighted average life that is published. It's published daily by this, as the Treasury rates, by on the Slugs rate site. And we all go there in the morning of the closing, set, and the rate is set based upon the weighted average life. And that doesn't change. Now, that rate is set regardless of whether the borrower and our repayment source is rated BBB minus and hanging on for dear life. We need an investment grade rating for our borrowing, or AAA. That's the rate that is set. We don't add a premium for that credit risk. We also don't add a premium for the ability of a borrower to sculpt their loan repayment and extending the term of the borrowing of the repayment, which I'll talk about an example momentarily for that, where capital markets, if you're terming for the bonds, for the loans, there's usually a rate increase, but we don't add that type of rate increase. We also don't add a rate increase for subordination. We'll talk about the subordination momentarily. The rate is set for everybody and anybody that comes through the WIFIA door at 1 basis point over the weighted average life of the loan. Now, we do offer the bottom bullet in the bottom item in the favorable rates line item. One-time re-execution is available. We're now in the 3% loan range. And rates have gone up significantly. Most of our borrowers, we closed loans in 2019, 2020 in the 1%. So what happened is some of our borrowers that we closed back in 2018 originally, those loans closed at a 3% rate. But then the market rates had just dropped pretty significantly, and suddenly borrowers were coming to us and saying, my neighbor's getting a 1%, I have a 3%, I got a $500 million loan, that's hundreds of millions of dollars of difference in interest, what can you do for me? So we developed this program, and we said, well, you know what? As long as the borrower hasn't started the relationship with Treasury, meaning they haven't started to draw on the loan, we can reset that interest rate with consultation with the Treasury. And it's not a matter of just swapping that page out. We have to go back up through a credit process. We have to go through our channels internally. It's about a 6-week process, 6 to 8 week process. But we were able to do that for a number of our borrowers that had over 3% rates, to bring down their rate to 1%, to the 1% range through this reset program. I'll give you a couple examples. San Diego was a deal that we closed. They were over at 3.36%. We reset that at 1.29%, saving them hundreds of millions of dollars on their deal. San Francisco is the same size, but even a little bit larger. They were at over 3%, and we changed it to 1.45. And Orange County, we went from 3.06 to 1.04. So we were able to do that. We're now in an interest rate environment that's pretty high as well. So some borrowers have different options about funding sources. They can use cash, they can use revenue bonds, they can use SRF. They have other sources that they were using, because again, we're only a partial funding source. We're not trying to take over the market. We only fund 49% of a project of eligible costs. So if a borrower has the flexibility to use that extra, those other funding sources, they have a free option of resetting this rate, the higher rate, if rates come down. Nobody has a crystal ball to say, it's going to be in a year, it's going to be in 2 years. We don't know, but it's a free option that's available through this one-time re-execution. But the key is has to be when somebody has not started their relationship with the Treasury, they haven't made the first draw yet. I had one borrower that was going to draw a few $100,000 on a 400 million plus loan, and then they weren't going to draw for a while, and it was like, maybe you find a different source to pay that few $100,000 and, keep this option available to save hundreds of millions of dollars, literally over the life of the loan. So it's just something that another flexibility that we offer, the rate reset.
Martin?
Yes.
There's a little bit of stalling on your end. I was wondering if you might want to turn off your camera, and maybe that might help save on the bandwidth.
I'm happy to turn off my camera for everybody's benefit. Okay, there we go.
Just so that we can get the good content that you're talking about here.
Okay, great. Is this better now without my camera on?
You're good so far. I'll let you know if we encounter anything more.
One other thing that we offer, and again, there's no premium added to the WIFIA rate for this. There's no penalty for prepayment. When you issue revenue bonds, usually, except if you're in the tax exempt market, you either are not allowed to do prepayments, or there's prepayment penalties for early prepayment. We don't add any premium for that. There's no penalty for prepayments. We also, and the next line item is really very important. We're going to see an example of that very shortly. We offer sculpting repayment. So we offer during the draw period, we offer capitalized interest. You don't have to pay anything. As Downtown mentioned, we offer, in one of the early slides, we offer a 5-year deferral. What that means is once you reach substantial completion, we generally like to have some borrowers start the prepayment, but we offer that the next 5 years, you can defer principal, you can defer interest, no payments. So let's say we have a 5-year draw, even a 7-year draw we've gone up to for different projects, 7 years. So you got 12 years where you're not making any payment to us. And then we offer sculpting thereafter. We're going to see an example where a borrower chose to have interest only for quite a period of time, and then to go into the principal repayment after the first 20 years of the loan. So what that does is existing SRF, that existing revenue bonds that you have your rate base already established to repay all of that debt. You don't have to raise your rates higher to repay the WIFIA loan at the same time. Instead, you start repaying us after that is fully off your balance sheet. And now you can use your existing rate base that you were using for your revenue bonds and for your SRF that you can use now to allocate that to repay the WIFIA loan. And there's no increase in the rate because of that. It affects the weighted average life, but we don't add on additional premiums because of term risk that the deal's going out 42 years from the day of closing. That we don't add any of those rate premiums. So the sculpting repayment, and we'll see a slide which will demonstrate this very shortly, borrowers have looked at that and found that to be very beneficial because, again, it helps them with their ratepayers. The WIFIA can take a subordinate lien position. Now, the caveat to this is that we want a subordinate lien that's true and tried, where there's market acceptance, where it's got an established market presence. It's not a new lien that's going to be created for WIFIA. But we have done transactions with some large borrowers that have had a very robust subordinate lien program, and we can slide into that slide into the subordinate indenture instead of the senior indenture, and that helps those borrowers where they can allocate the senior lien maybe for revenue bonds, where a subordinate lien may add premium to revenue bonds or other types of borrowers. So we've worked with borrowers, we've closed transactions with the subordinate lien, but we have to work with the borrower to make sure that we're comfortable on the subordinate lien for a specific borrower. The other structuring flexibilities that I'd like to just highlight is the second one. We can work with a borrower with their existing indenture or their resolution or the ordinance, whatever it is that the debt financing framework is structured under, and we try to fit ourselves into that. So if you have a debt service coverage ratio, you have an additional bonds test, you have different financial policies and programs and structures that the capital markets have accepted, we try to fit ourselves into that structure so we're not recreating the wheel. And by doing that, we try to help with the reporting requirements that we're looking for to say you can use EMA if you're using that for your bondholders already. You're reporting up there through the EMA system. We don't have to send something special to us. We can get the financial reports that you're supposed to do to us through EMA as well. We try to make it as easy as possible for borrowers not to be duplicative in their terms and conditions, and not to be duplicative and recreating something that extra work for borrowers. I'd like to talk a little bit about the bundling features. Forrest touched on them, but I'd like to talk about the combination of projects. Now, I had one borrower where the water and sewer and wastewater system were combined into one commission. What this borrower did is they took their 20-year CIP, a 20-year CIP with projects for under both of those entities, both of those groups, and created a timeline to finance those projects through WIFIA much shorter. They expedited that, and then it was about 28 projects that they expedited. And then what they did is they then used deferred the repayment significantly. They had capitalized interest during the construction period. They deferred the 5 years. They had interest only for a certain period of time. And then they had that payments, as I mentioned, back-ended, heavily back-ended, utilizing, the people talk about buy now and pay later, and sometimes these are scams and things like this. This is real. This is a build it now and you pay back later model, and there's no interest rate premium because of that. So we've had a number of borrowers that have taken advantage of that. I'd also like to talk about what a master agreement. We've touched on that sometimes we have borrowers where they have projects where we can't finish the environmental work. It's not really yet fully planned and designed, and we're just not able to maybe they're thinking about a new water source. They're thinking about whatever it might be, and the programs and the project's not fully baked yet for us to be able to get to our NEPA. So what we've done, or they have other different projects that they're, for whatever reason we can't get to a NEPA. So what we've done is we've created a master agreement. We can close, let's say they have 3 projects they want to finance with us. 2 of them are fully baked. We know exactly what's going on. We can do everything that we need to do. And the third one's not. They're in the third one, but they know it's approximately this much cost. This is what they're expecting. But we can't close a loan for that one. So what we've done is we've created a master agreement that wraps all 3 of these projects, and we say, okay, the first 2 projects might be 200 million, and the third project is 50 million. So we have a loan program with the terms and conditions set up for a $250 million program for this borrower. However, at closing, we only close on the first 200 million loans, and then the last one, we have with your loan agreement, we have the term sheet, everything's plugged in. We can't set the interest rate though, because we can't actually close on that loan, and we have to set the interest rate on a loan closing date. So then the borrower will send us some information, later on that project, and we'll actually do a second closing for that project. But the idea is the terms, conditions of that third loan, fully baked. It's already set. The WIFIA loan agreement is already set. We just have to fill in the interest rate. We just have to fill in the interest rate and the term sheet. All the different things, documents that we need, they're all baked for that third loan as well. This locks in key business terms for a borrower. So that's something that borrowers have found helpful as well. And when we're looking at a financial model, we like to project out what borrowers are thinking about future debt, etc. So again, a borrower can include some of those future projects in their loan request of their letter of interest to say these 2 we can close on, and these 2 or 3 or whatever one we plan on doing over the next few years. but we're not going to be able to close on those, but we'd like to get a master agreement for that. So if you look at our letter of interest, you'll see that we talk a little bit about that. Certainly with our application, we talk about that. Our application form on our website, we talk about the idea of doing a master, and we have a one pager on our website that describes it further as well. And we're happy to entertain questions on anything, but certainly if you're thinking about a borrower that might, or a borrower is thinking about, their program might be beneficial, might be able to benefit from this. Okay, let's turn to the next slide. We had a borrower that came in with it was through a public financing authority, and it was for a wastewater treatment plant, and the public financing authority had 2 members. As we were speaking to them and talking to them, we recognized that this was a transaction where it was not going to be a joint obligation. Each one wanted different terms, and each one did not want to be affected by the other. So we quickly realized that the best model to use for them was going to be separating the loans. So we worked with them. We separated the loans into 2. That's loan 1 and loan 2. It was for the same project, the wastewater treatment plant, where one owned 75%, one owned 25%, but each one had, so even though it was one project, we were able to create 2 loans for that one project, and with different terms and conditions related to each borrower. This I have to full disclosure, the rate at closing, this was done in 2020, so that's why it's in the 1%. So the first loan that we closed, the borrower wanted a heavily sculpted structure, back-ending the principal repayments pretty significantly. And the second borrower wanted to do level debt service, get it off their books, and just have the debt repaid. One thing that they did is, if you could look down, the loan was closed in November 2020, but the first draw wasn't until 2025. What a number of our borrowers have done, and that's why we were able to, when I mentioned about some of the early deals that we did in 2018, we were able to do a loan reset for our borrowers. What some of our borrowers have done is, besides for using the 51% match proceeds, either cash or the revenue bonds that they were going to use, or the SRF loan that they were going to use, some of them have used short-term notes for the construction period, and we are locked in at our interest rate at the loan closing. They use as the takeout for the short-term notes that they've been using to finance, and short-term notes are even going to be lower than the slugs rate because of the short tenor of the short-term paper. So that's the model that they used in the structure. They weren't planning on having a draw till 2025. They closed the loan in 2020. And we're a takeout for the short-term interim financing, and that was fine for us. Again, we try to make our program as useful and as beneficial to our borrowers as possible, and that's another flexibility that we have of deferring the first draw. Here they went 30 years beyond substantial completion. Substantial completion was going to be in the 2025 period. They could have gone another 5 years, but they chose not to. They chose to keep it on at 30 years from final from the projected substantial completion date. So let's turn to the next slide. And I think this slide, it's a lot of colors over here, but what we have is, this will really put into focus the benefit of the sculpting and the benefit of our program. So the orange, whoops, we lost it. Oh, there we go. Okay. So the key benefits of our program. So the first, this is a 42-year financing program for a borrower. The orange is the WIFIA loan. So the first 7 years was the drawdown period. There's not a cent being repaid to WIFIA during that period of time. It's accrued interest during the drawdown period. The borrower could have then substantial completion was going to be at the 7-year mark. The borrower could have taken another 5 years and said, I don't want to make any orange payment here. I don't want to make any payment to WIFIA during that 5 years. They didn't. They chose not to be that I don't want to say aggressive, but not to be that, not to expand the deferrals that they did that much. But they could have taken another 5 years, no payment to us. Instead, what they did is the next 13 years they did interest only. So look what happened. What happens is the blue and the gray and the dark blue that's in the first 20 years, that's revenue bonds. You see on the bottom, it's 2010 bonds, 2014 bonds, 2018 bonds. It's all the existing debt that they had. Is going to roll off after the first 20 years. So during that period of time, all they're doing and paying to WIFIA is interest on their loan. Then they could have even further sculpted their repayment. They didn't, but they chose to say we're going to do level repayments over the last 20 years. So for the first 22 years, there wasn't a penny of principal payment paid to WIFIA. They deferred it and said we'll do level debt service after our revenue bonds, and they also other borrowers have had SRF debt that will all roll off in the first 20 years of our program, and then they will use the rate base that was allocated to repay their existing debt. They can now use the rate base that's available to repay the WIFIA loan, and they don't have to raise rates to the ratepayers for us. Certainly not during the initial 7 years. The interest payments are depending upon the size of the transaction and depending upon their excess rate base. They may have to raise rates slightly for the interest payment, maybe not, depending upon the coverage. And then they have limited rate base usage and allocation for the last 20 years of this loan, and that's when they can allocate the rate base revenues that they have coming in to our loan instead of the bonds that they have. So this is a this slide really shows the benefit of the flexibilities that we offer and how this will impact the rate payers of a specific borrower. So with that, I think that's really what I wanted to describe about all the flexibilities of the program. And we're always interested in hearing borrowers' ideas for other things. Can you think about doing this? Can you think about, that's how we came across doing a master agreement, doing the interest rate reset. You know, some of these things were borrower derivative from what they're looking at and what they're seeing and how they thought we can offer flexibility, and we're open to it. You know, even though we're a governmental program, we're not locked into, we're locked into our statute, but as long as this doesn't violate our statute, we're happy to entertain other flexibilities for borrowers as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Danton. Back to you.
Thanks, Martin. So that was a lot of information, and I think we have about half an hour to entertain any questions that you guys might have, either on the financial aspects that Martin presented or the technical and federal requirement aspects that Forrest and Ashley presented on, or just anything in general about the program. So I see that there's one question in the chat box, but if you are comfortable with raising your hand, we can kind of get questions that way, or if you want to keep throwing questions in the chat box, we'll go through them one at a time.
That sounds good. Do you want to start with the question in the chat, Danton?
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Forrest, this is going to be a question for you. It's from Cheyenne. The question is, assuming that as part of the technical review evaluation, how is a project schedule or cost considered reasonable? And is the goal of the technical review to avoid wild fluctuations in the project costs and schedule that could upset the loan process later on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I'm going to start with the second half first and kind of then lead into that first part. So really the goal is making sure that at time of closing, that until you get to substantial completion, that you're really factoring in all the cost fluctuations of the market, any supply chains, and that you have built in that extra time if need be, and that extra kind of contingency if need be. And so that review is kind of that what is reasonable. is a little subjective, but it depends on your project and how much contingency is built in, what level of design you're in, and then has your contingency kind of reflected the current market conditions? Has your schedule reflected the current market conditions in terms of supply chain issues, particularly for those domestic requirements? So even if you are able to comply with the waiver from BABA, you would still be subject to American iron and steel requirements. And there are current delays on certain items, really factoring in those times so that it's reasonable in order to stay on track in terms of substantial completion. And so it does really depend on each individual borrower and the application, but those are some general terms.
Forrest, if I can just add, this is mine one more time. So we've actually gone back to borrowers and asked them to raise their contingency because we felt that their number was off. Their number was too low. When depending upon as Forrest said, the design and other things, especially with labor shortages these days and contracts coming in and being bid out and coming in all way higher than expected. So we've gone back, and even though that raises the amount of the WIFIA loan that we can now do, because we're 49% of eligible costs, and contingency is of course one of the eligible costs. That's okay. We'd rather raise our loan amount and have a reasonable sources and uses and have a reasonable expectation for that the project can be built within this financing framework. And we have more exposure to the project. That's fine. That's fine for us. But we really many times in the past in early years we went up to our approval parties and they looked at the contingency and said 10%. That seems low, and that was before all this labor shortage and supply shortage and all that. So again, we've gone back to borrowers. We'd rather have a higher contingency because that gives us more confidence that the project is reasonable.
I want to add on top of that and to say it is better to be conservative with our program within reason, so that you make sure that you have we want to make sure that you have the funding that's needed to complete your project. As we kind of look at it, you may take out a $50 million loan, end up only using $35 million of it. You're not paying principal and interest on a $50 million loan. You're paying principal and interest on what you take out. So if you take out $35 million, that's what you're going to be paying principal and interest on, not the entirety of the loan. So it's an up to amount. You can kind of think of it that way. All right, I see a hand. Is it Asem?
Awesome, yeah.
Awesome.
Would this program apply to planning studies and feasibility studies?
Yes, those are considered eligible costs. And Forrest had mentioned it previously in terms of those would be considered developmental phase activities where they can be rolled into the overall estimation of your eligible project costs so that you can maximize the size of the WIFIA loan that you can get.
And as consultants, we're the ones who would apply for these loans or through a public agency?
It would most likely be the public agency that is applying. We really want the owner of the project to be applying for them.
So really our role is to kind of like open public agencies' eyes on this kind of possibilities, or where do we stand in the whole process?
Certainly. So
yeah, I think go ahead, Forrest. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, as consultants, you can be assisting your clients in helping them achieve these projects. And so WIFIA is an opportunity to finance these projects that you might have. And so, as you're assisting your clientele and figuring out what's the best way for them to build and finance and construct these projects. We are an option out there and pretty flexible one to consider.
Yeah,
Thank
if
you.
I can just clarify a point as well. So planning and design can be included with the construction, with the overall program. But as Forrest mentioned early in the presentation, we also offer, I think it was Forrest, we also offer planning and design loans on in and of themselves for a project. It has to meet the statutory amounts, the $5 million project cost for a small municipality under 25,000 or $20 million project, overall project for the for 25,000 or more service area, but and then the WIFIA loan would be 49% of that. But we can do purely, we've done some pure planning and design loans for borrowers where there's not there's a construction that's we're hoping for based upon what, but we don't know where the planning and design is going to come to say whether or not it's going to be a project. So that's important consideration as well. It can be part of an overall program with construction. We know wastewater treatment plant, and we know there's planning, design, and all the other uses, all the other line items. Or it can be just a planning and design loan for a borrower. Okay.
Thank you.
Shelby?
Thank you. Regarding the Build America, Buy America waiver, does EPA expect that other agencies receiving federal funds under the American Rescue Plan Act and IIJA may follow suit with a similar version or a similar waiver?
Yeah, I can answer that. So IIJA, I think for the most part, the funds coming out of that is going to be implemented by the SRF programs, so the individual states and their SRF programs. It is going to be separate and different from what the typical SRF funds are that are being that are kind of going through the state revolving funds and being funded through capitalization grants. So the IIJA funding is a federal fund, and it will be subject to Build America, Buy America requirements at the initial stage. So, once it kind of makes it back into the SRF program and it gets cycled in through the revolving fund, then it no longer is a federal fund, but that initial funding through the IIJA will be considered federal. The SRF program is pursuing a similar waiver for Build America, Buy America requirements. The comment period, I think, ended a few weeks ago, and they're kind of working through updates to the waiver based on the comments that are received. I believe they are going to issue another public comment period based on the changes that are being made. I don't know what the timeline looks like for that, but it will be in the near future. There are some other agency-wide, EPA agency-wide waivers that are also being considered that are not as relevant to WIFIA, but may be relevant to the projects that you're considering. There's the de minimis waiver, which will apply to WIFIA as well. But there's also a small projects waiver, for projects that are smaller in size, which typically don't come through our program. For ARPA funds, ARPA had recently issued some guidance in terms of Build America, Buy America. And so I would advise you to kind of go to their FAQ website. I think they have a really good website to kind of lay out those requirements of the ARPA funds. But for ARPA funds, based on my understanding and my read of their FAQ, will not apply Build America, Buy America, except if you were to co-fund it with a program that does require Build America, Buy America, then you would have to use the more stringent of the requirements, which would be to implement Build America, Buy America.
Downtown, do you want to also maybe mention about the cognizant entity?
Oh, yeah. Build America, Buy America, the requirements are being overseen through the Office of Management Budget, their Made in America office. So they have issued Build America, Buy America implementing guidance that kind of outlines when there is co-funding taking place, where a program may have dueling waivers that apply. And so they have kind of clarified or identified or defined the term cognizant agency, which essentially means that if you are co-funded, the waivers that would apply to you would fall under the program that has the greatest federal fund for your project. So in the case of, like, say, a project that is co-funded with WIFIA and SRF funds, where the SRF funds are from their typical state revolving fund and not the IIJA, and WIFIA is funding 49% and the SRFs are funding 51%, and it's mostly non-federal, then the WIFIA waiver will be, or the WIFIA program will have the cognizant role in this case, and so the waiver for WIFIA would apply to your project as a whole.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was another question related to whether or not the presentation would be available or made available. And Shelby, I can definitely share it with you. And if there are any interested parties who would like to take a look at the presentation, feel free to share that.
Yeah, that sounds great. And just for everybody's awareness, there was a typo in the invite. It mentioned Pacific time, but it was actually Mountain time that this presentation was held. So for those of you that have just joined, fear not, because this is being recorded and I can send it to you directly. So reach out to me if you'd like to see that recording. And I'll drop my email in the chat.
Was that my fault? Did I put Pacific time?
No.
My apologies. It
you're
was.
okay.
All right, and I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but if there are any questions, give it a few seconds.
Yeah, and I am, again, my name is Shelby Smith and I'm with Brown and Caldwell. I've been helping several clients go through the WIFIA application process. So if anyone has questions about this, feel free to reach out to me and I can either answer your questions or connect you with Downtown. We can chat more about it.
Yeah, and this last slide here kind of provides a couple of resources that might be useful for anyone interested in learning a little bit more about the WIFIA program. We have our general website there. There's lots of resources in there about how we deal with terms, loan terms. What do typical business terms look like? Federal requirements. We have a borrower guide in there if you want to kind of take a look at how we oversee the federal requirements for projects. We are a very customer-oriented program, so we do love to speak to any potential clients out there who are interested in financing through the program. So if you are one of those potential utilities seeking funding, feel free to reach out to us and talk a little bit more about your project, and maybe we can give you some pointers about whether or not it's the right funding for you, what your financing structure looks like, what projects do you have. We're happy to kind of schedule a one-on-one to discuss those details with you. And once again, my name is Downtown Wynn. Ashley, I was joined with Ashley Longery, Forrest Petrich, and Martin Levovitz. And we're all very happy to answer any questions you might have after this. So feel free to reach out to us.
I think we got one more question.
Oh.
And so it was sharing insights into the shift to the rolling application period. And I think one particular reason mentioned was in order to allow borrowers to come in at a time that better fits with their project and their project schedule. And then one additional one is so that for smaller borrowers who might not have the same resources as larger borrowers, it allows us to interact with our letter of interest. And if there is questions or feedback that we might have to be able to understand maybe the creditworthiness or the technical portion during our determination, we can then communicate that and get updates rather than a nope, denial, and you have to wait till next year kind of thing, a situation. So that is two reasons. There's several others as well, but that summarizes a little bit of why we went to.
Good news, bad news.
Yeah, thanks, Forrest. I think you summarized the two highlights there in terms of our ruling process. I think for us, it's about providing as much flexibility as we can possibly provide to give you the financing that you need for your project. So this was an opportunity for us to kind of open those doors up and be able to really work, one-on-one with the potential borrowers to make sure that they get the funding they need.
Yeah, and I would just add that we'll have on our website the rolling total of the availability for borrowers throughout the year, so that people will know where things are standing as far as available funds through the WIFIA program, given that it's a rolling process now.
Okay. Well, thank you, Shelby, for having us again. And you guys have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.